Hey everyone, I'm Selena Madrid. Thank you so much for joining us for this month's segment of Bridging the Badge. What is stratified policing and why is the Las Cruces Police Department putting so much effort behind it? Bridging the Badge starts right now. Hey everyone, well today, like we just told you, we're talking stratified policing, how it helps guide deployments and how it's already helping shape crime reduction efforts across the city of Las Cruces. I am joined by Las Cruces Police Chief Jeremy Story and Lieutenant Cody Austin. Thank you both for being here with us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, we've been talking about stratified policing pretty publicly on our social media, and I think that's because we really want to be transparent with the public and we want them to know what we're doing and why we're doing it. So let's talk about it. What is stratified policing?
Stratified policing is a concept that's developed by Dr. Rachel Santos and Dr. Roberto Santos. And one of them comes from a crime analyst background and now an academic, a professor. And one of them comes from a policing background, was a commander at a pretty large agency and is now a PhD and a professor. And what we're trying to accomplish with stratified policing is take all the evidence, because there's a lot of evidence about what works to reduce crime, but it's really hard to get cops to do it day to day. And so stratified policing is about how do I operationalize evidence-based policing? How do I get cops to do it as part of their day-to-day activity where it just becomes normal as responding to a call for service? And then the other side of stratified policing is the accountability. So how do we hold ourselves accountable to make sure what we are doing is working, and if it's not, how do we adjust? How do we pivot from there?
And they were actually here too in person giving trainings on stratified policing.
They were. So as a part of this rollout, we did several phases, and that included training for us as command staff and training with all the officers and above, so that we understood the concept and how do we actually do this.
We've seen policing change over time quite a bit. How is this different than traditional policing?
When people think of policing and when officers think of policing, they think about call response. So, in the mid-'60s, 911 came about, and from then on, policing became, we get a 911 call, we get a non-emergency call, we go handle that call. Mm-hmm. And that's a very important part of policing. But what we also know is there's a lot of stuff that police can do to reduce crime that doesn't involve call response. In fact, call response doesn't really reduce crime very well. It's getting that other half of policing to be as normal as responding to calls.
Mm-hmm. Data, I think that's the big thing that stratified policing comes with. Lieutenant Austin, talk to us a little bit about data-driven policing and what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good question. And overall, what we're trying to do is utilize real information as part of our decision making. Some of this is looking at crime data, some of our arrests, calls for service, but also traffic information and things that can help us guide to ensure that we are putting our officers in the right areas at the right times.
And that coincides with hotspot policing. So if you notice, I'm sure out in the public, we've been very open about it on our social media as well, El Paseo in particular. Can we talk a little bit about that and how that is a hotspot, and then just use that as an example, I should say, in regards to what exactly this means?
Yeah, so specifically in the El Paso area, some of the things that we're looking at is all of our data collection is showing us that we have a problem, and we see that through a heat map. To give you a visual context, there's a number of calls that are reported, and we start to see this grow as far as color. It can change different shapes, different sizes, different colors. What that is telling us is we need to focus our efforts, more align it to this area.
Mm-hmm. And Chief, can you talk a little bit about how successful stratified policing has been in other departments who have used it and used this data-driven approach?
It's successful simply for the reason that when we connect the evidence to the practice, you're going to see success. When we do these studies, or when people do these studies in police departments or around the country, around the world, they see that these particular interventions work. They reduce crime. So when we find a system that actually helps us do that better day to day, you're going to see reductions in crime. So other departments have seen significant reductions in both property and violent crime and overall crime from implementing stratified policing.
All right, so now what we want to do is we want you guys to go ahead and take a look at a video that we shared on social media recently of Chief Story in briefing talking about stratified policing, what he wants our officers out on patrol to know. Take a look.
It's good to be in briefing. What are we actually going to focus on for LCPD for 2026? And why are we even doing stratified policing? To sum it up, it gives you guys a clear mission. The whole point of stratified policing is to narrow our focus so that it's a lot more achievable. So I'm not asking you guys to basically go deal with all these hotspots, because there's a lot of them, but here's what we're actually going to focus on for 2026. So our goals for this year are a 10% reduction in overall crime. A 15% reduction in auto burglaries. One of the things we're going to focus on is burglaries with a firearm specifically, but hopefully that will give us more of an impact in auto burglaries. A lot of these kids are out there looking for anything they can take from the cars, but what are they really targeting? Guns. 20% reduction in drive-bys. From pre-COVID to last year, 400% increase, over 400% increase in drive-bys, where structures or vehicles are being hit, not kids shooting out the window into the air, where things are actually being hit. That's crazy. 400% increase. So it's something we need to address. So what I can say is that we have decades of evidence, dozens and dozens and dozens of studies, but collectively over 40 years of research. And what it says is that if we spend time where we're visible in hotspots, it reduces crime, with rare exception.
All right, Chief, let's talk a little bit about that video. You were in briefing. All lieutenants are on board, as far as sergeants as well. Can you talk about just how the information is given to our people on patrol and what you want them to do with it?
Yeah, I went to all the briefings for all the shifts a couple times, as well as briefings for investigations and other sections. What's really important is that this has to be a top-down approach, but the officers at the bottom, the detectives are the ones who are actually going to accomplish the mission. They do the work day to day. So it's really important that we're all on the same page. We understand what it is and what we're trying to accomplish. We understand what the goals are, and then we're all working towards those common goals.
What do you want the public to know? What are we currently seeing in some of these hotspot areas that is alarming?
So in the hotspots, we have two different types of long-term hotspots. We have problem locations and problem areas. One is based more on calls for service. One is based more on crime, long-term, right? 2 to 3 years of crime data. But really what you see is the crime is high and the calls for service are high in these same areas. They're seeing things like in the El Paseo corridor, you're seeing things like trespassing, a lot of the quality of life issues, harassment, shoplifting, retail theft, batteries, assaults. You are seeing more serious violent crimes that are occurring a lot of times between the homeless population. So that's one thing. You're seeing that in some of the other problem areas, but we have one problem location that's an apartment complex, and the problems are a little bit different. More narcotics violations, a lot of drive-bys, and other violent crimes. So it just depends on the location because the problems are unique to that location.
And Lieutenant Austin, how are our officers using this information?
So overall, our officers are getting an update, but it's starting with the top down. Mm-hmm. And so as Chief had previously spoken to, we have our problem areas and problem locations. So each lieutenant operationally has been assigned one of these. And so, for example, I'll use Lieutenant Savage from day shift is for the El Paseo area. And so that encompasses a larger area. And it goes from El Paseo to Idaho, down Sloan, down to Missouri. The other locations have been divvied up amongst the other operations lieutenants to where it's very specific as far as a certain location. So we're looking at the Walgreens at 1256 North El Paseo. Some of the information that we received is they've had a lot of loitering, a lot of trespassing, and a lot of shopliftings that have occurred. So from the lieutenant's aspect, they are tasked with that problem location. They will have those meaningful conversations, they will have those community meetings, and they will get a ground level perspective of what the officers are encountering. And it's up to the lieutenant to ultimately go through and come up with a viable solution. Once the lieutenant has set the direction as far as how they plan to address it, if that's working with management, if that's working with the security in the area, or also the environmental design, they will come up with their plan and they will communicate it to their officers to try and address that issue.
This is really an all-hands-on-deck approach. We're super lucky to have the collaboration that we do. Let's talk about the Real-Time Crime Center, because this is also a big resource that we utilize every single day, and it really does help with this operation.
Yeah, the Real-Time Crime Center is a piece of this puzzle. It's a piece of both the call response side that I talked about and also the proactive side, which is really what we're addressing today. There's a lot of things they can do to help supplement our efforts, especially in the problem areas and problem locations, and try to provide support so that we're actually getting actionable leads to follow up on significant incidents that occur in those areas.
So how does this work day to day? Let's talk about it. So when an officer comes in, basically what does their day look like in regards to answering the call for stratified policing?
So one of the great things of policing is every day looks different. You
Right.
never have 2 days that are the same, but they do have a responsibility for call response. We're a very busy jurisdiction. We have a lot of calls for service. So there will be days where potentially they from start to finish calls for service. That's probably not typical. It's busy, but maybe not that busy every single day. So stratified policing is about doing the proactive work in between the calls for service. So if I clear as an officer, if I clear a call and I don't have a call pending, I'm spending time in these locations. I'm getting out on foot, I'm driving around, I'm talking to people, talking to business owners or employees. I'm trying to get a sense of what's going on, put a visible police presence in those locations because that will reduce crime. So it's balancing both the proactive and reactive side of policing.
Let's talk about community impact because this is so important. How are they impacted by stratified policing in this mission?
I think overall it's a huge burden to carry just as law enforcement, and we need the community's help in anything that we do, along with the business owners. And I think by having them out there when we're not there, they are our eyes and ears, and they can report things that maybe we're not seeing on our data. And I think some of the things that they will reap the benefit of or the impact is it's going to reduce crime in the area. It's also going to help us faster identify current trends and seeing if we are having a meaningful effect and if we are seeing that translate somewhere else. And for us as the leadership, we have to adapt and move our resources to that new area.
And not only is the community seeing a more noticeable presence in these specific areas, however, I think something also that a lot of people have had questions about are the big surveillance cameras that they see placed around places. Can we talk about that?
Yeah, so zooming out big picture, when you're looking at crime reduction, there's kind of four main prongs of proactive crime reduction. You have the place-based, which is like hotspot policing, and what you just talked about is a component of that. You have the person-focused, you have problem-solving, and you have community-focused. And going back to the previous question, the problem-solving is about trying to figure out what is actually going on. A lot of times we go to a call and we just try to solve that problem for that moment or that day. Problem-solving is about trying to figure out why do I have 10 calls for service in the last 2 days in this one location, and let's see if we could fix whatever's causing that. And that involves working with property owners, businesses, potentially faith-based groups, and actually bringing in partners to solve the problem. We can't do that by ourselves. And the community focus side goes hand in hand. That's about building trust and legitimacy with the community so that the other three prongs are effective. You cannot do any of the other three effectively without the community focus prong. The surveillance trailers are just one part of that. We know that visible police presence deters crime, and part of that is the surveillance trailers are kind of a form of visible police presence. It allows us to have eyes in that location all the time, even when there's not an officer.
Let's talk about early successes because we haven't been on the stratified policing train for too long. However, we have been on it a pretty significant amount of time. Can we talk about the wins?
Yeah, so far what we're seeing improved coordination, not only within our department, but also externally. I think some of the things that we're seeing is we are having our accountability meetings, and so it's a measurable output that we are looking at with our lieutenants to see what is working, what is not. But some of the things that we've also learned is we cannot do this ourselves. We cannot arrest our way out of it. And so it has also led to some partnerships with the MRA group led by Blair Flores and her team. And we've started to align our efforts with other city departments to try and also combat this issue.
What would you say to people who are skeptical about this approach?
I would say that's a natural response. And I think somebody being skeptical to a new form of law enforcement or how we're transitioning, it's understandable. But I think that's where it's our job to show that we communicate what we're trying to do. We're trying to be transparent as possible of how we're trying to resolve this issue.
And I would say even officers are skeptical too. Our entire culture is built on call response. So why we have to do stratified policing is we're trying to get officers to actually buy into this and realize that this works. And to people who are skeptical, officers and citizens, I would say there is decades and decades of research. We're talking about hundreds of studies. We're not talking about one or two studies that are just by themselves. We know that hotspot policing, we know that problem-oriented policing is very effective for reducing crime if you do it.
I guess some of the comments that I see on social media sometimes are, why are we so worried about shoplifters when there's a bunch of bigger crime happening out there? Can we talk specifically about how all this is important and there are specific units within the department who are responding to different types of calls at a different magnitude every single day?
Yeah, so just because we focus on certain areas or even certain crimes does not mean that we don't give the attention to the things that are happening that are outside those groups. For instance, we have significant incidents which are homicides, robberies, burglaries that involve a firearm, and any drive-by where there's property damage, a vehicle or a structure is hit. That doesn't mean when there's a sexual assault that we don't do our job. We have to do our job with every single call that comes in, and we've done that historically. We have very high clearance rates compared to the national average. None of that changes with stratified policing. But we do have to look at, if we focus on everything to the same degree, we end up focusing on nothing. So we have to look at what works, and what works is focusing on specific locations that have a higher amount of crime, a disproportionate amount of crime relative to other areas.
Great insight. Let's circle back to collaboration, because we know this isn't just a police problem, that this takes collaboration from so many different other levels and people. As far as the city goes, did you want to talk about the MRA?
Yeah, so overall, Chief Story has brought us into the MRA and aligning our efforts. And what was unique about this is once we ran all of our data through our Intel analysts, we were able to see that a lot of our problem locations and our problem areas fell within either designated or planned to be MRA areas. And so we were already in this area, and looking at it, we were taking the meaningful enforcement action, but it gave light to that there is a bigger issue and we cannot do this alone. And so working with the city, and specifically Blair Flores and her team, what we realized is there are a lot of things that are outside of our control. Some of those things, if you look along the El Paso corridor, is a lot of buildings and businesses that are closed up, they're boarded up, and they're fostering a lot of crime. We as a law enforcement agency cannot necessarily deal with that issue. And by partnering with economic development, partnering with their team to hopefully see that building be improved, see it boarded up, or to see the calls be somewhere else. Some of those other things that we looked at was the vegetation that was in the area. We would see that a lot of people would congregate in this area of an abandoned business, loiter, and bring a lot of trash, tents, and so forth. So we worked with other departments to ultimately try to clean that area up and get rid of the blight that is in the area, to see if we can improve the quality of life not only for the residents that live there, but also the businesses that operate.
And we've seen too firsthand our community outreach officers out there with Blair and her MRA team talking to businesses. I think connecting just on so many different levels is so important, not just with the MRA, but with building connection out in the community too. It builds trust.
It does. And I think overall, her and her team have done a good job. There are a number of resources that her team offers to some of the businesses that have been affected in the area. Some of the broken windows, they are able to utilize a grant to have their windows replaced.
Right.
They also offer a number of things as far as for businesses that put security cameras, help with fencing, environmental design with some of the landscaping in the area. I think they have a huge task that they're taking on, but that's where we realize there's a void that we could fill because we are already in there. And maybe her team has already reached out to those business owners, and maybe they weren't at the point or the position to take her up on those offers, but now maybe when we're there, we can reinforce it and make sure that they are aware of the opportunities that the city is offering.
And it helps show everyone that we really are all on the same page and we want the same things for our community. If you're interested in learning more about what those grants entail, they are still very much available for you to utilize for business owners. We'll go ahead and link the link to learn more about that in the comments or on this page and in our website as well. Let's talk about cruise lights though, because this is something new and it's something that we are about to start talking about on social media pretty publicly. What are cruise lights and what do we want the community to know?
So cruise lights are a function on the light bar where there's essentially one light on each side of the light bar that stays on constantly. It doesn't flash, it doesn't strobe, it just stays on. There's a few studies out there now on the use of different types of cruise lights for crime reduction. What we know is that in general, high visibility reduces crime. So when people know the police are in an area, we tend to see a reduction in crime while we're there and for even up to 2 hours after. So the cruise lights are another way to have high visibility. The public needs to know as they start to see this that if the lights are not flashing, that they don't have to yield, they don't have to move over to the side of the road. That's the important part, is to make sure we communicate that message so that people know how to respond when they see them. But if we're driving through a shopping center with cruise lights, that's really the function, is get in those areas and make sure people see that we're there.
Yeah, and the video that you're taking a look at now, it shows exactly what that's going to look like.
Hey Las Cruces, this is Officer Armidas with LCPD. You may notice that some of our patrol units are driving with city cruise lights on. Over the next few weeks, more of our patrol vehicles will be outfitted with these lights. This video is simply a PSA to help our community understand what they are and what they mean. If you see steady cruise lights, you don't need to pull over. We're just patrol. Flashing lights and sirens mean we're responding to a call.
How many of our vehicles do you know are going to be fitted with cruise lights, and will they typically be used everywhere or just in those hotspots?
So we have to go back and program them, but over time, all of them will be programmed. And the goal is to use them in any area that's experiencing crime. So even if they're responding to a call for service, obviously there's safety considerations. If I'm going to an active call, I'm not going to have my cruise lights on, especially if we're responding to something that's in progress. But if I'm just driving around an area, whether it's a hotspot or not, the cruise lights can help us with reducing crime.
Did you want to add anything to that, Lieutenant Austin?
No, I think it is a great asset. That's something that's new to our department. And I think from a perspective of if I was off duty and if I'm in that area and I have hesitation, I'm at least seeing that officers are in the area proactively. And that also gives me a signal to where they're at in the event I need to report something or my family needs to report something. And I think it's a good addition to what we're already doing.
Can we talk a little bit about crime reduction just in general, what we've seen under your administration, and I guess what the hope is, where we want to go? What's the goal?
Well, so I'll start with the bad news. The bad news is that we're still above the national average for property crime, violent crime, and overall crime. But we've made significant progress in the past 4 years. We've had a reduction for 3 years straight. Prior to that, it had been nearly a decade since we've had a reduction in overall crime. So now from 2019 to current, or through 2025, we actually have an overall reduction. We saw a spike 2020, 2021, 2022 was the highest, and now we've come down every single year. So that's great news. So far, year to date through March, we're at an 18% reduction for overall crime. So our goal is to maintain that, and we want a double digit, at least a 10% reduction. Obviously, higher is better, but through the end of this year.
And we're hoping to, I assume, that stratified policing is going to help with that push, help continue to bring it down.
It is, and some of our goals align specifically with those areas, but when we reduce crime in those areas, it actually reduces crime for the entire city, and so that's the goal.
Let's talk about how supervisors are tracking performance on this.
Yeah, so overall, supervisors are looking at it. We have a meeting that occurs monthly, and it's our Stratified Police Accountability Meeting. And so that's an opportunity for every lieutenant to come up and show what the data is showing. Did we have an increase in arrests? Did we have an increase in calls for service? And if so, what were those calls? And then the follow-up question is, how are we addressing those calls? And I think overall, with this first month of the formal meetings that we've had, I think it was a good benchmark to see where we were at. Looking at the data from the previous years to where we're at, and I think it's evolving. And I think as we hold on to these meetings, we're looking at, are we having a reduction of calls for service if it be for trespassing in the El Paso corridor? Are we having less criminal damage to property that's going on in the area? Are we seeing an increase in apprehension in some of the shopliftings that are occurring? I think those are all good measurable markers to see, are we having a meaningful impact? And if we are not, that's where we are there in a group and we come up with strategies together to try and address it and hopefully get to the desired goal that we're looking for.
Some of the questions we receive on social media include, should we call 911 every time we see something? Can we talk a little bit about that, and if calling 911 helps with that data-driven approach to give you guys a better look at what's happening on the ground?
I hate to say it depends, but it depends.
Yeah.
Obviously, if they feel that it's an emergency, they need to call 911. Sometimes if they see something that just seems suspicious or off, they can call the non-emergency number, 575-526-0795. What's really important for us is that we get as much description as possible. A lot of times someone will say, there's a car in my neighborhood, it's suspicious. That's a conclusion that tells us nothing, right? Tell us exactly what's going on, what is the car doing, what is the person doing, so that we can address it. That helps us a lot when we're responding, so we can make sure that we have the information we need to address it.
As far as stratified policing goes, I think that the Las Cruces Police Department, well, I know LCPD, has made it a goal of your guys' to be transparent and be as transparent with the public as possible. Why is it so important to talk about stratified policing publicly instead of behind closed doors?
I think there's several reasons. First, you mentioned earlier, this is a partnership between the community, between businesses, between other city departments. And the more we're on the same page, the better. Because again, we can't do it alone. So if they understand, they have a general understanding of stratified policing, they don't need to maybe have the nuanced understanding that I expect my lieutenants to have. But they know what it is, what the goals are, and how we're moving towards them. They can come alongside us and be a part of that. That's probably the most important reason. The other thing is when they see officers in certain areas, they know what's happening. It's they got the cruise lights on, they're driving through the Albertsons parking lot in El Paseo. They can say, oh, they're working that project because it's a hotspot, it's a problem area.
We're talking El Paseo a lot. Can you just briefly give us the rundown on other hotspots in the community that we're focused on right now?
So there's a couple things. There's short-term problems and long-term problems.
Okay.
Short-term problems are based on, let's say, 14 to 30 days of data, whether it's calls for service or crime. So those pop up all the time. Every month we're assigning new ones to sergeants to work. The long-term problems we are working for all of 2026, the problem area is from, it's that El Paseo area, but it includes from El Paseo all the way to Solano, north of Idaho, all the way down to Missouri or Bouts. So it's a relatively big area, but it's small enough that we can handle it. Two of our problem locations are in that problem area, which helps us align our efforts internally. You have the Albertsons on El Paseo and you have the Walgreens on El Paseo. Those have been long-term issues since probably my entire career, really. You have the Speedway on Loman, 2210 East Loman, and that plaza around it, that's been an issue. And then you have 1900 North Solano, which historically has been the number one crime hotspot for the city for at least a decade.
Okay. Is there anything else that you guys would like to add on just the work that's being done on the ground to make Las Cruces safer?
Yeah, so on two of those locations that Chief just mentioned, I want to kind of give a highlight to some of the work that is going on by our department. The 1900 North Solano community outreach has done a number of projects, identification, and has worked with management. Currently where that sits is there is going to be a new management taking over. We have already approached them with some of our concerns related to the parking lot and trying to secure that area, and also trying to ensure that the tenants that occupy it are conforming to the rules and regulations there. For the 2210 East Loman, our officers have been proactively approaching that area. As you drive around the Texas Roadhouse area, some of the signage that's put up on that building, you will see the no trespassing, no loitering signs. Our officers are taking a proactive approach to try and address the foot traffic and crime that is occurring at that location while working with management to ensure consistency amongst the staff. And so I think in those two areas, our goal is to see a meaningful impact and hopefully a reduction in crime in those areas.
And what I will say is, although those are the areas that we're focused on long-term for this entire year so we can measure, that doesn't mean we're not addressing crimes in other areas or responding and doing everything we can for those individual circumstances. Or when we are in another area, we're also trying to reduce crime and detect crime. So we have to focus on certain things so we can measure it, but we're still concerned, of course, with the entire city and the safety of all of our citizens.
And we have already seen crime come down quite a bit. You know, we're going to continue to keep doing that work on the ground to make Las Cruces a safer place. We want to thank you so much for joining us today and talking about stratified policing.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And we know stratified policing is very complex. I'm sure there's a lot of questions. If you want to drop your questions in the comments below, we'll make a separate video answering those. Like I said, the Las Cruces Police Department's goal ultimately is to be as transparent as possible. We'll see you next month for Bridging the Batch.